Moving on to our next group of subsistence is horticulture. So we're going through these 5 groups of subsistence as if, there are really clear-cut definitions or divisions between them. But in the real world, there's a lot of overlap. People may they will utilize whatever resources they can to survive and thrive and make sure their children are fed, right? So even though we talk about these, foraging, horticulture, intensive agriculture, pastoralism, and industrial food systems, as if they are, sort of very easily bounded and recognizable things, the reality is that there's a lot more overlap and messiness in real life. So these are some images that come out of horticultural environments. In general, you'll find horticulture is small-scale farming, and often very small, in fact, only enough to feed a person's family. They may also have small herds of animals in order to help support their families, and often the entire family will work to support the family's needs through horticulture. So these are some of the characteristics of horticulture as small farms. We often call them gardens because they are most often linked to a particular family or a particular small community. People who work in horticulture are using basically hand tools. They are not using, tractors and, digital tools, digital technology to gauge rainfall and, soil composition. These are folks who oftentimes will have, relatively simple hand tools like shovels and hoes, and possibly, plows for animals to pull. But they also don't have irrigation. They rely on natural irrigation or rainfall. This doesn't mean that they're not going to utilize the resources in their environment to direct water flow. Sometimes it just means that they're not using, let's say, complicated sprinkler systems. But certainly people will always use the resources in their environment if they can. Horticulture also, because people are gardening, it means that they have to be settled. And usually they are settled in small villages in which groups of people are working towards providing subsistence for their own families. They may practice some hunting and gathering to supplement the kinds of things that they're growing in their gardens. They may also, as you saw in the picture in the last slide, they may also have a small herd of animals in order to support their families as well, something we call animal husbandry, which refers to breeding animals for humans' purposes. Number 5 says that the tasks are often divided by sex. So just like foragers, we usually have a sexual division of labor, but it's very different among horticultural groups in that in some groups, women will do the bulk of the labor, and in other groups, men will do the bulk of the labor. So there's not one particular template that all horticultural groups use. So depending on the resources in the area, the history of that group, sort of political and social norms, gender roles in that group, women and men will do distinct things based on the needs of that group. And number 6, they may use swidden farming, sometimes called slash and burn farming, or shifting cultivation. All these terms are they mean the same thing, which is that people will burn an area of land. It is generally very highly controlled, like a controlled burn for an area that if it caught on fire in a natural way, would be, it would get out of control. So the fire departments will often do controlled burns. So it's that kind of controlled burn in which they know exactly the area they'd like to burn. It's often fast-growing trees and brush. Once they burn that area, all the ash falls into the soil. And that ash is actually very nutritious. Soil needs nitrogen, potassium, NPK, nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus. I'll have to look that up. Those of you who know are probably telling me right now. But basically NP and K. And so having that ash in the soil creates a lot of nutrition for planting. It's sort of like a natural fertilizer, right? Because, you know, when you plant anything, the soil is the most important part of that. The soil has to be living, and it has to have a lot of nutrients in it. So for swidden farming or shifting cultivation, people will plant in that ash. Let's say they're planting, you know, beans, corn, and squash, which is a traditional Three Sisters Mesoamerican or Central Mexico, South American type of planting. These three crops work together. They provide structure for each other, and they also provide nutrients in the soil that help each other grow, which is why, for instance, the Aztecs subsisted on them or survived on them for many, many millennia. Many hundreds of years, let's say, for several millennia. Once these plants have come up, right, people will harvest them, then they'll let the field go fallow, right? They'll let the crops die there. They won't plant anything for a while. And those crops will disintegrate into the soil, making compost. Those fast-growing trees that were there before will probably grow back again. And for the next planting season, people will move on to another area and do the same thing. If they have enough land, they can do this over a period of, let's say, you know, 5 or 10 years or even more. And by the time they get back around to the first area that they burned, all those trees will have grown again. The soil will be rich, and they can use that same technique for a very sustainable sort of planting. Unfortunately, today, people just don't have enough land. There's too many people on the earth, all 7.5 billion of us, almost 8 billion. We just don't have room for this anymore. So whereas it can be a very sustainable way of growing, we no longer have the resources for it. One way in which slash and burn planting or slash and burn clearing is used is in the rainforest. And you may have heard of you know, large companies that sell a lot of hamburgers, not to mention any in particular, going into the rainforest and clearing millions of acres of land by burning them. Or palm oil plantations in Indonesia, where orangutans make their habitats, just burning huge areas. And in the case of the rainforest and hamburgers, then these particular companies, multinational mega corporations, would then raise their beef on rainforest land, effectively killing the soil after a while, eroding the soil, so nothing ever can be planted there again unless we go through another period of building up the soil. So slash and burn farming is sometimes linked to these kinds of really harmful practices, but those are not, those are mega corporations doing that, not the small scale farmers that you would see in horticulture.